Nice to see everyone's very punctual joining, but I'll give people the final 2 minutes to make their way here. Good. Well, I think maybe now is the time to get started. You've found the right place if you were looking for the Life Sciences breakout session. My name is Ingrid Kelly. I'm a member of the IST Technology Transfer team, and I mostly deal with our life sciences projects. As Mark has already mentioned, we have a great lineup of 4 very innovative life sciences researchers for you today. We have just half an hour to talk to these people, so we're going to keep it pretty short. And what I'd like to do is really explore a little bit about the 4 people involved, how they got where they are now, what technologies they're working on, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. So if you do wish to pose a question to any of the speakers, please feel free to do so while they're talking, and we'll see if we can fit those in. And if we have time at the very end, we may be able to pose a few additional questions to individuals or to the group as a whole. I'm very pleased to be able to start with Matt Robinson, who is a relatively new addition to the IST team. I hope you found your feet by now.
Hope so.
and the topic that you want to tell us a little bit about is health data. But before we get into that, could you perhaps tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you end up at IST and how did you end up doing this type of research?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I started a PhD at the University of Edinburgh in a kind of a statistical genetics department. And at the time, they were really interested in improving crops and improving meat yield and dairy yield that we get from cows. And this is a long ongoing field of research. And at the time, I was applying these statistical methods to better understand how wild populations respond to climate change. And then I kind of realized that the same methodology could be applicable to humans in a healthcare setting, so that we could develop statistical models that could help us to better understand the genetic risk factors that underlie why we get sick, and the age at onset of when we get sick. And yeah, that's how I transferred across. Came to the IST in May 2020, so I've been here just over a year, and have just set up my research group now.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand correctly, you're basically using big data to draw conclusions about various aspects of biology and how that might impact on our use of resources in health systems. Is that right?
Yeah. So we have 2 aims really. Whenever you go to a medical practitioner, they always ask you, what's your family history of such and such? And that's because family history is one of the biggest risk factors that we have for many common diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, etc. And basically what we try to do is give a better understanding of family history. So can we predict whether what your risk is of certain diseases? Can we provide you with a better understanding of why you might be on that risk scale, which regions of the DNA are most important, how many are there, where are they located, to give just a better general understanding of how disease progresses and why it occurs, and then also to try to be able to predict it in the human population. So yeah, we combine large-scale medical genetic studies from the UK, Finland, Estonia, Germany, and America, And we try to link all this information together to try to kind of better understand how these mechanisms work.
So in order to do this kind of analysis, presumably you need very, very good data. So good quality data, extensive, comprehensive data. Is that an issue? And in particular, is that an issue in Austria?
Yes, it's become easier recently to get access to these kind of linked health records. So we're linking electronic health records to information about your DNA. And in Austria, that's incredibly difficult. And in fact, it doesn't exist. And Austria is now quite a long way behind other European countries, such as Estonia, Finland, and the UK, as I've said. In Estonia, for example, some of the predictors that we use are actually fed back to the general population. And it's been shown that if you give someone an indication of what their underlying risk of cardiovascular disease is from their DNA, that they will modify their lifestyle. That they will take active changes to lead a healthier lifestyle. So this is kind of a form of preventative medicine. It would be amazing, given the Austrian healthcare system, that we actually have linked electronic records now through our e-cards. It would be wonderful to extend studies that have occurred in Austria, such as Genome Austria, but they have DNA data from only 1,000 people. What would be amazing is to just make it a routine part of healthcare.
And I understand that you're currently reaching out to industry to try and get them involved in helping to fund an extension of Genome Austria.
Yeah, so as an example in the UK, with the UK Biobank study, it's kind of a perfect role model for how you can have public-private partnerships, particularly from pharmaceutical companies, where the data in an anonymized form can be used to drive drug discovery, whilst also permitting researchers to better develop ways of understanding how these things work in the general population.
We have a question or a comment in the chat about the issue of data protection. I'm sure this is something you've had a lot to do with.
Yes, of course. We take this very, very seriously. To me, your DNA data is owned by you and should be owned by you, just like all your electronic health record data is. We certainly are not interested remotely in allowing there to be, insurance decisions made upon your data, if that's your concern. Rather, we are interested in improving the healthcare system and improving an understanding of what your individual risks are.
Great. So just in the final minute, so what does the future hold? Where does this all lead?
As the technology becomes cheaper and as we understand more about the links between your DNA and disease outcomes, this will become routine in healthcare. People talk a lot about personalized medicine, but I think the biggest goal here should be for genetics to play a role in preventative health.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks.
As I say, we have very little time, but I'm very happy that we can move on to Sandra, I guess, if you're online. Yeah. Yes, brilliant. Hi, Sandra. Excellent. So you're a neuroscientist, and we can see from the background there, you have some very dramatic cells going on there. As we did for Matt, could you first start with telling us about your career and how you ended up as a neuroscientist and in IST?
Yeah, so hello everyone. I studied biology in Germany and went then for my PhD to Switzerland, where I've been working on identifying a molecular signature of retinal cell types. And actually I discovered that there were disease genes, which are not only in the photoreceptors, but also in other cell types in the retina, which was at that time pretty surprising because most of the time people only think about when the photoreceptors are mostly affected. So based on this finding, I got also encouraged to look further in other disease phenotypes and went then in the US to the MIT, where I've been focusing on disease genes associated to schizophrenia. And there I found, like, for example, that a certain epigenetic factor caused an behavior phenotype associated with schizophrenia. And then at that time, I got also more and more exposed to the effect of the immune system. So this is like something pretty interesting for me, because most of the time neuroscientists think about, there's just a nervous system, but 50% of the brain are actually not neurons. This is like all kind of other cells, and one of the cell types are so-called microglia. These are like little immune cells which are actively intervening with the brain structure. And I was curious to explore this further, and that was actually where I then in 2015 came to IST and started my group to identify their impact in the nervous system.
And one of the things I think that happened that you weren't anticipating is that during the course of your basic research, you came across a finding that could potentially have a real impact in the world of psychiatry. Maybe you can take us through that.
Yeah, that was one of our very surprising examples. So we were, as a basic research institute, we were actually more asking, which effect, for example, has the drug ketamine? So we use ketamine in animal research very much to induce anesthesia. But this causes massive changes in the brain. And we were wondering whether the microglia would respond to this. And we were strikingly surprised to identify that the microglia remove structures which are which are involved in plasticity, of brain plasticity. So they remove or preventing brain plasticity. So it's kind of, you unlock the brain in a way. But even more strikingly was that when we further looked into the action of what ketamine does, it changes the brain state. And we recapitulated this brain state changes with light entrainment at a certain frequency. And we could partially recapitulate the phenotypes we have been seeing with the ketamine. So the microglia, what they have been doing is like eating up the structures, free up the brain for new plasticity. And with this light entrainment, we could see the same. And that brought us in a new perspective where we thought we could think about light entrainment as a new strategy to, for example, treat patients that's suffering, for example, of depression, especially in the context with ketamine. There's a lot of like treatment-resistant patients, and ketamine is a drug which is not very commonly used. So we thought, or we think actually, that this might be a new way to actually access new groups which are currently excluded from treatment because ketamine is so severe in this system.
So the science is in place and you've got really good data. And the next idea would be to start a company on the basis of this finding. And what would you say is missing? And where are the gaps that maybe could be filled, perhaps with the help from people here today?
I mean, as I said from my CV, is like I'm a trained biologist and a neuroscientist. So for me, this whole topic from industry, so this, yes, we know from bench to bedside, is a nice concept, but actually converting a scientific finding into a product and commercializing it and is something I'm not trained to. And there is actually the point where I'm actually very grateful also from the TRIST office and the IST that it gives some help. However, now we are in a state where we think about how to set up a company potentially. And there we need like people with an entrepreneurship and helping us to get this commercialized side to place, because the science is there. It's just like how to convert it to the next level. And yeah.
So if anyone out there with business experience wants to join the next exciting startup, they should reach out to you.
Exactly.
Very good.
It would be great.
Okay. So, I mean, neuroimmunology is a very young field. So what are the perspectives? Where are we going with this? What's the potential for the future, especially in terms of, medical applications?
I think there is a lot of aspects which have for a long time be overlooked. I mean, we can think about all aspects like for example, all the anti-inflammatory drugs, for example. Yeah, we taking ibuprofen, aspirin, all these kind of drugs we taking. However, they are actively impacting our immune cells in the and also we don't yet know how they would potentially influence our brain structure. We also know that, for example, in the way how we eat, yeah, what we eat is digested in the gut. And signals can go from the gut towards the brain and can also influence our brain function. So I think there is a lot of potential, which is currently totally not explored at all, which makes it a very fascinating field. And I think there is still a lot to discover, which makes it very exciting.
Excellent. So we're looking forward to your future research in that area.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And since I don't see any immediate burning questions at the moment, then I would invite Gaia to join us.
Here you go.
Hi, Gaia. So, and as Marcus said, I mean, you're a neurodevelopmental disorder researcher. And when I met you a couple of years ago, I think you were probably then in the situation that Sandra's in now. So I remember you were exploring the idea of founding a company, but it was still very uncertain how that could actually happen. And in the meantime, just a few years later, you founded not just one company, but two. So clearly something went right there. We'll hear a little bit more about one of the companies, so Solgate from Ariel next. The other one is Neuralentech. So perhaps you can share a few insights into how you made that transition from being a researcher in neuroscience to being a co-founder.
Yeah, so I think the very first important thing also Sandra mentioned, right? So we are scientists, and so we have a very limited knowledge about business. And especially we have a very limited knowledge about how to convert and to really translate something to practice. And you know, Ingrid, we have been going back and forth with a few reiterations of those companies and ideas. And so I think the very most important thing is really to have the right support that I can really say that maybe in another place, in another institute with not the same support, I would not have, at least not at this time point, funded two companies. So I think the great support was one of the clear success. The other part of it was, of course, to also identify and to find the right people. And so you have always to find good partner in crime. And I think this was essential. And, you know, I was very lucky. I mean, Solgate, Ariel, we'll talk about this. I found an amazing partner in the founders and as well in the people that are working in the company. But also Neuralentech, I have two great colleagues as founders, and also some of the people that were used to work with me in my lab decided to make the transition and to move from this building to across the street to the IST park. And I think this was key because there was a real technology transfer, as the real words say. And so I was lucky to have that. So those were the two things, the main thing. And of course, I mean, the idea and not thinking that, you know, you just wake up once and you have the great idea, but rather to really work on it and say you may have the intuition, but then how to really move this forward, it takes a lot of work. So it's a similar process as the process in research.
Mm-hmm. And for listeners who don't know anything about Neuralentech, can you explain a bit about it?
Of course. So Neuralentech develops cellular models for neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism spectrum disorders, epilepsy, intellectual disability, So this is the focus of my lab. And I think the aim, my aim, but the aim of the company is really on one side to facilitate better diagnostic. Matthew before introduced genes as one of the main cause of many of our disorders, and so certainly genes, mutation in genes are the cause of neurodevelopmental disorders as well. So to facilitate this diagnostic path, maybe some of you don't know that often those disorders are diagnosed very late in life. I mean, late compared to how our brain develops. So often a clear diagnosis doesn't arrive before the age of 4 or 5 years, which is very far, much too late. And so this is on one side. On the other side, of course, most of those disorders, they have unmet needs, and they have no, they are not targeted by any specific drug. So that's certainly something that we want to do. And we know that in the past, preclinical models such as mice, even though we are really using them, they have had some limitation. And so having human-based models could be critical. There are a few examples at the moment that were, you know, testing a drug in a human model gave real advantages to understand whether those drugs are effective, and also to make this discovery faster.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So do you get the impression that industry is finally waking up now to the needs in this area, the autism and therapies in psychiatry in general?
Well, I think the industry is kind of is scared about this area. And the most frequent claim that I hear is like, well, because it's very difficult. But I think that's why scientists are taking care in part of that, and to make also this transition, because we like challenges. And so, yes, I believe that, I mean, and there is no, like, there is no option. It's not that we can decide. I mean, this is something that we have to take care. I mean, those are disorders of our kids, and our kids are our future. So there is no other way around this.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of brings me to the point about ethics. I mean, we've had many discussions about this. And do you see now a difference from the kind of ethical issues that you've had to deal with in academia and when you move a project into a commercial setting?
Yes, that's definitely one of the biggest barriers, especially I have to say here in Austria. So we still have to really be able to pass the message that, so, you know, I am one person, either that when I'm a professor at IST or as a co-founder in the company. And you know me, Ingrid, I mean, you know what moves me, that those are really the sentiment of trying to help those kids rather than to make money. That's not really what I want for me as a person. And nevertheless, I find a lot of, you know, as soon as you say companies, like eventually clinicians or people are scared. And I think this was a reaction that maybe I would have had also a few years ago, before learning that, in fact, without a business model, I was not able even to try to help those patients. So what I mean is like, so what I learned in the past years is that I need a business concept if I want to be able to develop something for everyone as a patient. So ethically correct, and not just for the one that are rich eventually, and to be able to offer some sort of service. So yes, I think we have to overcome that barrier. There is a big difference, again, when you say I am an academic or I am in a company. I mean, we kind of solve this by you know, making everything that Neuralink Tech, for instance, does available to academia for research. And I think this is a good way to go.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much, Gaia. So we're already on to our final speaker. Ariel, this is real lightning speed. So if you can unmute yourself, Ariel, and yeah,
I'm
great,
here.
excellent. There you go. Okay, yeah. So you're also someone who's done an awful lot of learning in the last year or so. Again, you were someone who was doing top research at the Center for Molecular Medicine in Vienna. And then you were basically handed a project and to make a company out of it, and that company became Solgate. I'm sure everybody would love to hear a little bit about how that happened, what Solgate is, and what solute carriers are, or membrane transporters, as we've said in the background there.
So indeed, in the past, I did my graduate studies at ETH Zurich, and there I was really working on cutting edge technology. Then I moved to CEM, and then I was working in an environment that really was on the entire spectrum from basic science to translational medicine. And that environment really sparked my passion for chemistry and being interested in new therapeutic modalities and really thinking about how can we advance drug discovery. And it is at CEM that I was working on these proteins that we see a depiction of in the background, these solute carriers. And really what they are is the gates to what happens in every cell in our body. So every cell in our body needs to uptake nutrients like vitamins, sugars, ions, and they need a way to get into the cell. So these are these gates, the metabolic gates. And by the fact that they control what comes in and out of cells, they in fact control metabolism in our body. And that makes it not surprising at all that they're involved in so many diseases. But for most of them, really, there's hardly any type of drug. A few of the drugs that are on the market are very, very known and very well proved, tolerated, and are helping patients. But for most of these cases, and by cases I mean targets, we really don't have much. And what really needed to happen here is a leap in technology that would enable that. And that is what Solgate about. It's about building technology to basically do efficient drug discovery against solute carriers.
And what kind of indications are you going to be focusing on as a sort of drug discovery company then?
Our biggest focus is first and foremost on the targets themselves, but we look at where basically indications where metabolism plays a very key role. And the first types of these indications are in different types of CNS disorders. There's quite a few indications in cancer, for example, where metabolism really plays a key role. And the very third and typical one is metabolic disorders themselves, such as type 2 diabetes, which is at the end of the day, a way by which metabolism dysregulated in the body. And if we could restore that metabolism through controlling the gates, we would be able to basically ameliorate the condition of patients.
Mm-hmm. It's still pretty early days for Solgate. And I know you have had some funding, including from IST Cube. And clearly you're going to need a lot more funding to really progress things. But what else do you need? Is there anything else that you would appeal to listeners to help out with?
I think the first and foremost thing is really the team. So it's really about people here. It's the environment in which you're at, the co-founders with which you work, the team of scientists with which you work, everything that is basically around you. You want to make a difference, and for that you need to work together. You need to work with brilliant minds and with brilliant investors and really push that forward. I think the other thing that you always are looking for is, and we always need, is that environment that enables growth and support. We came, as was mentioned, as a joint startup between CEM and IST Austria. We came here not just because of the physical space to growth, but also being in that environment that sees sort of a vision of speed and investment and sort of thinking big. And perhaps the last thing that you really need to always have and is always beneficial when you think ahead is really a bold vision, thinking big and sort of thinking what are going to be really the big advancements that you want to make and how to make them happen before they're even there. So it's really about thinking way ahead.
So if you could go back and meet a younger version of yourself, maybe 2 years ago, I mean, what would you tell that person about all of the things that you've learned in the meantime?
It really resonated with what Sandra was talking about. So I really came from an academic environment, and I think that the thing I had to learn the most moving into an entrepreneurial position is how to think in commercial terms. All the time, you're in a good way confronted with the question, what kind of problem are you trying to solve? How do you make a business out of that? And really making a business out of that is what is going to enable the solution. It's the good thing. And so who are we helping? In what way do we want to help them? And how success would look like? And I think that switch is very, very important. And I would say is that even though I came from an academic environment, you really can learn basically anything. You need to always talk to the experts, but we're trained scientists. We're trained to solve problems, and that's another problem that we learn how to solve by picking up new tools and figuring it out, and then constantly coming back to this experts. So talking is really an important thing. And I think one thing that definitely comes maybe in that transition, and what I would have told the old me, is that there are some risks that are really worth taking. Sometimes you hesitate, sometimes you kind of need to think a little bit about more, and sometimes you make that leap of faith, and it's going to pan and work out. So take faith in that.
Very cool. Encouraging words then to close up. We have, well, actually no time left at all, but if anybody has a really important question they want to pose to Ariel or anybody, please do so now in the chat. I'm going to put the link for the plenary session in the chat in a second. And perhaps, Ariel, if you could move over a little bit, if anybody wants to scan the QR code, then the other direction, then they can do so to get a, that's good, yeah, to a link to Solgate's current website. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening today. And I guess we're all looking forward to a very exciting plenary session in just a few minutes. So let me put the